Hello everyone. I haven't made a freeform video in a while now. It's just been office hours and Homer book club stuff. Um, but the events that have been going on in Minnesota are huge, historical, in their significance, I think. And I've been seeing some astonishingly bad takes on this from some very unusual places, especially veterans. Um, so I thought it was really important to sit down, take some time, and do a little video on this. Now, who am I? Why should you take what I have to say seriously? Well, I'm not an expert in some kind of technical sense. I don't have a 4-year degree. I don't have some Intel background. I am an amateur philosopher, and I am an electrician. But back between 2017 to 2019, I helped co-lead an Antifa group in the Seattle area. So I have some familiarity with Antifa and similar types of groups. And I wrote um, a paper. Actually, I wrote a book that predicted a coming civil war in 2017, and I wrote an essay more explicitly laying that out in 2018, which was about a year before Tim Pool gave his prediction on Joe Rogan's podcast. So, if that's intriguing, if that background makes you think I might have something valuable to say on this, then by all means continue on. So allow me to start with just the facts of these cases. There's a lot going on in Minnesota in general, and we'll get into that. But the two major events are, of course, the shooting of Lauren Good and the shooting of Alex Preddy. So let's start with just the facts of these cases. Now, Lauren Good arrived specifically to harass and obstruct Border Patrol and ICE officers. Now, this is not like inherently a crime. She was doing what we might call basic civil disobedience tactics. She was obstructing, at least not a serious crime. This is like get thrown in jail for a few hours and fined kind of thing. This is normal civil disobedience stuff. She was blocking a roadway, leaning on her horn, doing some kind of dance thing to the sound of her own horn. This has been used by environmentalists. It's been used by anti-oil people. All kinds of activists use this kind of civil disobedience tactics. After harassing agents in this way for some time, she was approached by one of them and ordered to get out of her car. Now, instead of following the order, she instead accelerated her vehicle, and in her attempt to escape the Border Patrol agents, I believe they were Border Patrol, not ICE, but I could be wrong in that, her vehicle glancingly struck a Border Patrol agent. The agent responded by drawing his weapon and shooting her 3 times. Now, there's a whole lot of debate around like which way the wheels were pointing. Well, they were straight when she started moving, but then they turned. It didn't look like she was trying to hit the officer. And at the same time, the officer looked like he genuinely thought she was trying to run him over. These can both be true. It didn't look to me like she was trying to hit the officer. We can't read minds. So then he shot her 3 times, and then her vehicle crashed. She was deceased on the scene. That was the first shooting. The second shooting of Alex Preddy went more or less as follows. And these are very brief summaries. You can go verify all this. You can look at the video of these events yourself. And I encourage you to do so. Alex Preddy likewise arrived to impede and obstruct Border Patrol ICE officers. A little different manner, though. He was not in a vehicle. He was on foot with a few other people. He saw Border Patrol agents apprehending or pushing a woman. He ran forward, disobeying orders to stay back, and physically intervened, putting himself between the woman and the agent, and started a physical altercation with the Border Patrol officer. The officer then maced him pretty heavily. Preddy went to the ground, and several other officers piled on top of him, and they started to try to sort everything out and arrest them by appearances. One of the officers reached down and removed Alex Preddy's handgun from the back of his belt. As the officer began to walk away with the handgun, one of two things happened. Either, one, the officer negligently discharged the weapon into the ground, or two, the weapon, which happened to be a SIG P320, discharged itself. This is rare, but it is a known problem with that particular weapon. Odds are probably higher on the former, the negligent discharge, but the video evidence isn't very clear. It doesn't look like the officer's fingers on the trigger. It's kind of hard to see. And then in response to the sound of the weapon going off, the other officers, pumped full of adrenaline in this moment, probably taking a little bit of residual mace themselves, maybe not. But in either case, in response to the sound of the weapon, drew their weapons and fired. Some people claim that Alex Preddy was reaching into his waist to pull out his phone, and the officers thought the phone might be a different weapon, hearing people yell, "Gun, gun, gun." So my initial response to these shootings was that they looked like bad shoots. That they looked, in everything, it looked like it was just tragic. That there was no murderous intent by anybody. Certainly not by Lauren Good, not by Alex Preddy. I don't think Lauren Good was trying to run over the officer. I don't think the officer meant to execute her. I think he was just reacting to being hit by a car. Apparently that officer had been hit by a car by an activist 6 months prior. And with Alex Preddy's case, it looked like a freak accident with either the negligent discharge or the SIG malfunction, triggering a response in these other officers who, again, didn't intend to, but when you're shot at or think you're shot at, it's a common response. The fact that it's tragic and there's no murderous intent does not mean that there's no one responsible. And my initial thought was, this is a bad shoot by the officers. It's not murder, but probable manslaughter. Definite firing. Right? Definite firing. Absolutely. That was my initial response. But of course, we have to understand the context of this. And you are not going to be able to understand why people are so divided on this if you don't understand the context. Now, there's an immediate backdrop to this whole, why is there so much ICE and Border Patrol presence in Minnesota at all? Well, last month we heard a fairly massive story about a Minnesota-based Somali daycare fraud ring that was going on with the apparent cover of the state government and Tim Walz directly. This was not only independently verified, but it appears to go back many years. And people had attempted to cover it on not just the right, but on the left as well. And the stories were squashed. So it was in response to this that we saw an increased ICE and Border Patrol presence in the Minneapolis area. This sort of begs the question, why would the government defend this fraud? Why would they support it? This takes us into the broader context of what's going on at the macro level in our country. You see, we've been seeing political advantage gained specifically by the Democratic Party by migration. In addition to possible fraudulent votes, this is very hard to demonstrate. It's very hypothetical. As Scott Adams used to point out, thank goodness of all the systems that are corrupt, our voting system, we can be certain that's the one. That's the one with all the room for, cheating and very little accountability, but we can be sure that one's fine. In any case, census population inflation means more representative seats for these urban areas as well. So even if no one were to vote, which is almost certainly not what's happening, just the population presence alone inflates legislative representation in those areas, so they bring more people in. This is actually a very old tactic. This is what led to Bleeding Kansas prior to the Civil War of 1860. So this is not. It should be pointed out that this is not an inherently leftist problem. It happens to be leftist at the moment. Back in the 2010s or early 2000s, open borders was a Koch brother right-wing kind of libertarian right position, and it was the left that was for securing borders. Bernie Sanders was probably the best border security congressman, senator in Washington, D.C. at the time, or up there anyways. But we are where we are at the moment, and currently it is the political left, the Democratic Party, Tim Walz in particular in Minnesota, and the Democratic Party in general, that is politically benefiting from the presence of these large populations of migrants, immigrants moving in, which is why they would be defending the fraud that has been using to fund and keep those populations there for the political power it affords them. That's a very short-term benefit for a political group that suffers basically no downsides and all upsides, but it is on the backs of America has suffered the largest migration in all of human history. I was checking with ChatGPT. I said, in his book, Vox Day and Red Eagle claim that America has experienced the largest migration movement in all of human history between 1965 and the present. Is that true? And ChatGPT said no. Well, it's strictly not true because there's a few other movements that are bigger, and the examples it gave were the Indian partition, which was about 14 to 18 million. Not even close. It said that was bigger. And it said it was bigger because it happened in a 1 to 2 year period instead of over about 70 years. And it gave another example, the European migration to the United States, which was about 60 million. And that was over about 500 years. So nothing is comparable. Nothing is comparable to the scale of migration that we have experienced since 1965 to the present. This comes with catastrophic social, political consequences. There's not been anything close in human history that wasn't caused by, related to, or directly the cause of massive war or the collapse of empires. The collapse of Rome was essentially a migration problem. At the time of the Roman collapse, there were fewer Romans than there were non-Romans in Rome. But nothing in history compares to this. The immigration threat we face today is existential. And unfortunately, this even includes legal migration. Like, legal migration is a massive problem. I don't know what we're going to do about that. But we can at least mitigate this problem by removing the people who are here illegally, which happens to be already against the law. So, ICE and Border Patrol, Trump has directed ICE and Border Patrol to start being a little bit more aggressive and assertive in doing that. And by the way, he's not going nearly hard enough if we ever hope to accomplish what needs to be done. Like, it's not fun. It sucks for a lot of people. But it simply, again, I cannot reiterate enough from the historical perspective how massive and historically unprecedented of a problem this is. But against this enforcement operation, which happens to be politically inconvenient to the Democratic Party, as we've already talked about, we see these activists emerge in Minnesota. Against this very belated attempt at preserving our border and our country, which may or may not work in general. It might be too late. I don't know. We see these activists showing up intentionally to disrupt, impede, obstruct, and harass ICE and Border Patrol. It's like, okay, maybe they're just activists who care about the method in which this is being done. But then we discovered the Signal chat that revealed extremely organized and state-funded, from the state of Minnesota, tracking of ICE and Border Patrol vehicles, communication across these different groups to surround and harass agents and warn the criminals, warn the illegal aliens so that they can escape. And in some cases, this is physically assaulting officers. But the one thing that I can bring to this from my own experience with Antifa in the Seattle area is that a lot of what this is attempting to do is to taunt and bait an overreaction from the other side, from the officers in this case. They are trying to draw out an overreaction which can be a media story. This is a very old tactic. I was writing about it back in 2017, 2018, when we were seeing it in person. They're very good at this. And that is exactly what happened. Because it turns out Lauren Good and Alex Preddy were not just random do-gooders who just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. They were in the Signal chat. They were participants in the resistance, a funded, organized movement that was whose purpose was to challenge the jurisdiction and control of federal law enforcement. That is an insurgency. It's what that is. It's very specifically the subgenre of insurgency is called a color revolution. With all due respect in the world to Forward Observer, I disagree with his nitpicking on terminology there. I don't think insurgency is the wrong word. Color revolution is a subspecies of insurgency. These tactics of demoralization, delegitimization, these incremental escalations in force that are I'm poking you to try to bait an overreaction. All of those are tactics that have been used by the CIA to overthrow dozens and dozens of countries around the world, Middle East, Latin America, Eastern Europe, so forth. This is basically common knowledge now, I think, at this point. And again, Lauren Good and Alex Preddy were both in these chats. Alex Preddy was actually on duty. They have these little emojis, apparently Tim Pool was reporting on this, that signify who's like on shift and who's not. So they were taking shifts in tracking, following, and harassing federal agents. They were essentially enemy combatants. That's what that is. They're enemy combatants, and they're still American citizens. And I know a lot of people will say, well, the fact that they're American citizens kind of matters a lot, and it does. But you know who are also American citizens were Aaron Danielson and Corey Comparator and Charlie Kirk, right? And many, many others. What do you call it when enemy combatants are also fellow citizens? It's called a civil war. And none of this will make sense until you truly recognize and accept that we are all in a civil war. That is the only explanation for this color revolution insurgency tactics that are being used to harass, physically attack federal agents, to delegitimize them and attempt to take away their control and seize power incrementally along the way. And I was writing about this, again, back in 2018. I made the claim that we were already in it, but it was latent. It was like a cold period, and that it would continue to escalate, and that at some point it might become hot. Or it might fizzle the way the Cold War with the Soviet Union did, where it's never really acknowledged. There's never any hot battles, but it's acknowledged as a war retrospectively. It appears that we're coming to the place where it's in the open now. When it is revealed that a state government is funding street thugs to, in an organized, systematic manner, like what intelligence agencies do to overthrow foreign governments, harass and undermine federal law enforcement, that is civil war. And if this fact, if this context doesn't change your perspective on the Border Patrol or ICE shootings, then you just haven't grasped it. You just haven't grasped it. And I've been engaging with a number of people on this point. I keep hearing things like, well, I want the illegals deported too. No, you don't. No, you don't. Trump is not going nearly hard enough. Not nearly hard enough if he wants to make a dent in the immigration problem that we have. If you oppose the methods necessary to at least begin to address this problem when they are faced with organized resistance that is designed to bait them into PR disasters, as they have successfully done, then you're being disingenuous if you say that you want them deported too, but you don't like the methods or something. We've allowed this problem to reach a scale that is maybe not solvable legally. But if we don't solve it, we fall into civil war and our nation collapses. So what do? You know, that's maybe an ethical quandary, but you don't get to say you want the illegals deported too, but disagree with even moderate methods, because none of these methods are going to be pleasant. There's no pleasant method for deporting millions and millions of people. Okay, so if you oppose the methods, you don't support the program. There is a claim I've heard too that this is authoritarianism. This is something I might have sympathized with if we were facing genuine authoritarianism, like what we see in China or Britain. But like, even if we were to get to those places, which we're not even like close to, that is a peacetime complaint, and it's being mouthed by people who were joyously and very enthusiastically supporting the most authoritarian moves we've seen this side of the World War II Japanese internment camps. I'm talking about the COVID lockdowns. Alex Preddy, there's a meme going around of Alex, not a meme, just a picture of Alex Preddy with a stay home, stay safe, COVID thing on him, which is ironic for reasons I hope I don't have to explain. So it's very hard to take that seriously, but there is no liberalism in wartime. I'm sorry, and we are in a war at this point. Like, anti-authoritarian, libertarian uninvolvement is not on the table. It's either going to be what we saw under the Biden administration, which is authoritarian censorship, harassment, deplatforming, and straight up like lawfare and imprisonment of political adversaries, which is far more authoritarian than anything we've seen under Trump, or a moderate ratcheting up. And again, Trump is not going nearly hard enough on this. We're nowhere near Biden levels yet. A ratcheting up of state executive action against the criminal presence, and in some cases the legal presence, of migrants that will destroy our country if we wait too long. And I know that some people who got upset by these ICE shootings also opposed the COVID lockdowns. You're a very important crowd, and I will get to you shortly. There is also a complaint that both sides are the same. And in the sense that both sides are political parties that have a political nature, then tautologically, yes, they are similar in that regard. They are not remotely similar in what they aspire to do. Okay. I'm beginning to get really tired of this one. the both sides are the same. Authoritarianism is bad when the left does it, and it's bad when the right does it. It's like, what do you mean by authoritarian? Like, do you mean the enforcement of law? Is that authoritarian? Um, you know, the left and the right live in different places in relation to time. The left is focused on the future. They believe in the myth of progress, that the future is better than the past. The right, as a whole, is believes in the myth of the golden age, that the past is better than the future, and that things are generally degrading, and we have to do our best to like withstand the corruption and corrosion of time. There's a few of us politically not very powerful people who believe in the myth of eternal return, that it's all basically the same sorts of problems over and over again. There's not much political energy in that myth, though. So, these parties, in their inclinations, are not the same. In their desires, they're not the same. The fact that they use similar methods and that there's a similar political nature to how they go about pursuing their ends does not make them the same. And we can think of it, and at the moment, they have different levels of extreme pathology. At the moment, it is the left. The left is insane clinically. I mean, like if you break down the number of leftists on psychiatric medicine, it is substantial. It's and it affects how they think, and it affects. It's crazy, and this will not always be the case. It has not always been the case. If we ever get, and I don't think we're close to this, but if we were to ever get an emergent Christian nationalist movement on the right, sanity would probably flip, and suddenly the left, Joe Rogan and those kinds of people would probably, RFK would flow back to the Democratic Party, and frankly I would too. But we're not, that's not where we are at the moment. At the moment, we're in a world where the Democratic activists are running around physically trying to prevent federal agents from removing illegal aliens. That is insane. And if you think, and the fact that politics is by nature psychopathic, in that like all politicians lie, all politicians are pursuing power. If you're expecting empathy, if you're expecting a sort of human-like nature from the logic of the political machine, you will always be disappointed and view the two sides as essentially the same. But the answer to that is anarchism. And anarchism is not freedom. It's just enslavement to another foreign government. That's where that will take you. So if you live in the real world and you start with experience rather than beginning with ideological axioms divorced from our lived reality, you're setting yourself up for some a bad time in either direction. And we'll return to that point. But the final criticism or counter, which isn't really a counter, but it's worth pointing out because it's the one I've heard most frequently, is getting called a bootlicker for saying, no, ICE is in the right for doing these sorts of things, and that Alex Preddy and Lauren Good were insurgents who didn't deserve to die, but certainly brought about their own death, and that ICE was in the right. Because ICE and Border Patrol have been experiencing these kinds of tactics on the receiving end of insurgent tactics for some time. And I get called a bootlicker. I've been called that like several dozen times just in the last 12 hours or so, which is fine. Footwear fetishists like to sling this word around, and I don't mind the spirit behind it, because we all like to question authority. We all like to not accept authority just absolutely. But what exactly do we mean when we call someone a bootlicker, or when you call someone a bootlicker? Do you mean that they are excessively deferential to illegitimate authority? Do you think that they're a bootlicker for respecting authority at all? They're like not punk enough or something. Um, if do you think I would be a bootlicker if I opposed the COVID lockdowns but support ICE? Does that make me hypocritical? Oh, I'm supporting one authoritarianism but opposing another. Or maybe does it mean I'm particular about what sorts of policies I think are good and want enforced? If you view that as hypocrisy, then your problem is not, um, a particular policy, but authority in general. And if your problem is with authority in general, then it is also with order. Um, Now, what's ironic about this is that this kind of criticism of authority and order, because any enforcement of it is bootlicking, or support for the enforcement of it is bootlicking. Like, oh, if a cop arrests someone for beating someone up in public, and I'm like, great, they're doing their job. Am I a bootlicker now? Um, there is still an appeal to principle there in the allegation of being a bootlicker. There's a claim that you should not be um, deferential or respectful to authority, but rather that you should be, perhaps it's an appeal to Emersonian self-reliance, maybe, or something. Um, and then that can lead to an interesting conversation of what is the better foundational value? Is it abstractions and, ideals, or is it institutions, or is it people and relationships? And that is an interesting rabbit hole that we can go down, maybe, but not right now. And it's one that I don't think that the bootlicker brigade has thought about very deeply. And I especially don't think that because what they are doing when they criticize ICE is they are tacitly supporting these paramilitary activists that are running around, attacking ICE agents. There's a video of Alex Preddy running up and kicking a border patrol vehicle and knocking the taillight out. There's some boot action for you. These are boots, and they're often the same boots that were supporting the COVID lockdowns and that were causing good trouble during the Summer of Love in 2020 and the riots of 2018 as well. They're the same ones, the same people. They shift from movement to movement because it's not actually about the cause du jour. They're using the cause du jour as an excuse to undermine federal authority. Those are boots. Bootlicker Brigade, why are you shining their boots? Or do you not realize that's what you're doing? Because that is what's happening. You don't get the no boots option. We all serve a master. What is your master? If you think you're an anarchist punk, no masters, no gods, it's a very noble ideal. Where did you get that ideal from? So that if this is confusing to you, there's a wonderful essay I would encourage you to read called Politics in the English Language by George Orwell. You should all read that, and you should all look at the phrase bootlicker in light of that essay. You should not let your thinking, your language do your thinking for you. That's what's happening here. That's what's happening. The phrase bootlicker is such an extraordinarily poorly thought through phrase, and it's used with such strange persistence. It's a curious psychological phenomenon of its own. Now that's all out of the way, I want to address my veteran friends. Speaking of boots, veterans, what on earth is happening to you? I've seen an extraordinary number of veterans come out against ICE and Border Patrol with incredulity. And these are exactly the sorts of people who should be most educated on what color revolutions and insurgencies look like. And many of my friends in the Special Forces community did pick up on this, and they're like, oh God, this is not looking good. But it's the grunts. It's the O311s from the Marines and the MARSOCs. It's the Army Rangers. It's the simple, fight 'em hard, basic, salt of the earth military veterans that seem to be just completely falling for this stuff. And I think the biggest one is the Second Amendment psyop that's been going on. Somehow, the Alex Preddy shooting is being framed as if it's a Second Amendment issue, and as if Trump is like threatening the Second Amendment. None of this has to do with the Second Amendment, not remotely. Nothing like the Second Amendment is involved in this. I think someone in the Trump administration said something stupid about like, oh, you shouldn't bring a gun to like protests or stuff, or specifically harassing federal agents. Like, has Trump ever exaggerated or spoken directionally? Ann Coulter back in 2015 was saying that Trump was going to be the front runner and eventually the president, and that everyone underestimated him because they took him literally but not seriously. They are taking now veterans who were able to track that, who understood Ann Coulter's point there, broadly speaking, who themselves speak a little bit not literally sometimes, in my experience with veterans, and also not seriously. I have somehow arrived at the least charitable, most literal interpretation of a public relations statement. Admittedly, a shitty and annoying public relations statement, but come on, guys. Like, how have you been suckered into thinking anything about the Alex Preddy shooting has anything to do with the Second Amendment? If you're carrying a weapon, like, you can watch the video, the agents did not shoot him because he was carrying a gun. They shot him because they thought they heard shots. Obviously, you know? It was shot because of an accident, which was instigated by him picking a physical fight with federal agents. And by the way, it's not against the Second Amendment to say it is stupid to take a gun into certain contexts any more than it is against the First Amendment to say that it's stupid to say certain things in certain contexts. If you are going to be harassing federal agents, it is unwise to bring a gun. Just throwing that out there. Depending on context, of course. The people in the Signal chat have spent decades trying to incrementally disarm us. They're the same people that supported BLM. They're the same people that were... They're the same people in all of these different protests. And they move from cause to cause like a school of fish. This is not about immigration. It's not about Black lives. Those are just useful narratives that they'll use to gain power. You're not defending the Constitution or the Second Amendment by defending these people. And this might sound like the tried and true, this time it's different excuse. I understand that. I understand how it sounds. Don't believe me. Don't take me at face value right now. Just think about it. Carry the thought with you forward through the next 6 months. See where that gets you. Because these people in the Signal chat, these people chasing, harassing, tracking ICE and federal agents, Border Patrol, are the first ones in Minnesota to support disarmament, to undermine the Constitution, the First Amendment, and all these other things at every chance they get. Again, we saw this under the Biden administration consistently. And I get the concern about the Constitution. I spent a decade as a bit of a free speech radical. It took me to some very dark places. Because if you really take defending free speech seriously, you have to defend the speech of people that you don't necessarily agree with and that the public will forever associate you with, even if you don't agree with them. And that's where I have wound up. This is why I will never be in public office or anything like that. I could not. Because of where I took my dedication to free speech. It was very, very serious. Um, it took me a very long time to realize that the First Amendment is not absolute, um, and that the hard barrier to the First Amendment, the freedom of speech, is not shouting fire in a crowded theater, as Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes said. It's just libel. Libel is the hard line. Libel is not protected speech, and the idea of protected and not protected speech actually itself undermines the absoluteness of the First Amendment. It took me even longer to realize that our notion of what the freedom of speech means was not the original founding fathers' intended meaning. It changed in 1919. It was transformed by that same Justice, Oliver Wendell Holmes, to mean something other than what it meant. And our understanding of the Constitution often lags decades or even centuries behind our dedication to it. And that can make our dedication to the Constitution not just quixotic, I'm probably mispronouncing that Spanish word, quixotic, whatever, but also pyrrhic, also self-defeating. The Constitution is probably the greatest civic treasure in world history. I really believe that. It's phenomenal. But it is the product of a people. It's the product of a certain way of thinking. The Bill of Rights is the way it is because it's essentially a codification of the rights of Englishmen. If we didn't have the tradition of English common law, we would never have come up with the Bill of Rights. They didn't take any time in thinking about the Bill of Rights. They just wrote down what was already common law tradition. It's in that tradition, it's in those preferences that the Constitution flowed out of, and if you lose that foundation, no adherence to the letter of the Constitution is going to preserve that way of life, that feeling. And what we're seeing, the people leading this resistance, by and large, are selectively invoking the Constitution to undermine the country. They see America as a colonial power and evil at its root, and that deserves to be destroyed and deconstructed. These are not people that are defending the Constitution. We are at war, and if you think, well, we need to defend a very, very bad interpretation of what constitutional rights entail, where a guy who assaults a federal agent is treated as a Second Amendment hero when he didn't even pull his gun. Like, literally nothing has anything to do with guns here. You're just throwing away your country. And this leads to my biggest problem with the veteran community where this case is concerned. I wrote a book several years ago called The Hero and the Man. It's about the Iliad and the Odyssey, which may sound very unrelated to what we're talking about here. But it is, because veterans have a heroic nature. And I don't mean that as a compliment, and I don't mean that as a criticism. You have a heroic nature. It means you are very passionate. You have a strong sense of right and wrong. And you're very capable. No one can stand in your way. No one can stop you if you want to go and do something. But your convictions are in abstractions. What is freedom? What is justice? One of the most complicated webs of a book in Western literature is an exploration of what is justice, and they don't come to a very conclusive answer. What is the Constitution? Exactly. Can you give a quick, concise delineation of the difference between natural rights and civil rights and when that changed? Which one is the Constitution? I'm not trying to criticize these abstractions. They're a fine shorthand. They're useful. They're great, but they're very easily manipulated. And the Second Amendment PSYOP is a very good example of that. There's this line from the movie Shooter where Mark Wahlberg says, they used his patriotism against him. He said, "I ain't proud of it. I ain't ashamed of it either." That's, I think, very descriptive of much of the veteran community. They have these affinities and these strong loyalties to abstract concepts that they don't understand. And it is admirable, but it also makes you controllable. And it's a very old story of heroes getting drawn into battles that they don't fully understand. And then once they begin to glimpse, when they have that moment of recognition, that tragic anagnorisis, they get disillusioned and they hate their former master. And if any of you veterans are listening to this and have gotten all this way through, I'm sure many of you have experienced that yourself. But Minnesota is another one of these battles. This is not right versus wrong. The world of politics is not a world of right versus wrong. It's a world of trade-offs and hard decisions, and a Kantian mode of judgment will condemn every government in existence. And you might say, well, fine, excellent. And then you're enslaved by the Chinese. So, we can debate Kantianism. We can debate deontological ethics against other frames of morality. But the reality of the world is that it's messy. And no one does more harm than the person with violent power and the absolute conviction that he is in the moral right, because he lacks humility. His absoluteness will drive him to the final conclusion of whatever line of thought he thinks is right in the abstract. The military taught you to be absolute, follow a code and all that stuff. And that does make you a valuable tool, but you also suffer for this. And maybe you've noticed that in your relationships, in your personal lives, have suffered from thinking in terms of right and wrong. You have to set aside right and wrong when you enter politics and replace it with good and bad. This is a very, very subtle but extremely crucial distinction that takes you from a moralistic binary that tricks you by the binary language itself into thinking you already know the answer into a moral gradient that where you're thinking not in terms of words but in terms of the experience and appearance of the world around you prior to language. Good and bad are experiences. Right and wrong are categories and linguistic categories. This might sound like a very esoteric point, but it's incredibly meaningful and it's incredibly freeing from a lot of these linguistic snares. You have to replace right and wrong with good and bad. And what that does is it sets aside the Achilles identity in you, this passionate warrior that through your own anger, your righteous anger, your menace, sends thousands of people to death before their time. And you have to become Odysseus, the man of twists and turns, who can understand and grasp complexity, nuance, can go this way and that way, and can think in a more organic manner and can recognize good and bad as opposed to right and wrong. So, not to preach too much, and I hope I don't come across as condescending, because I was there at one point too. I've spent the last 25 years studying philosophy, and it's taken me a long time to get here. I hope some of this is useful to veterans and to others who might be trapped in this. So stay sober, don't get high on your emotions. For God's sake, don't kill your thumos. Don't kill that spirit in you. It is good to have the capacity for righteous anger. And it's better for guys to get that and to have it be a little bit out of hand, a little bit of, and they go overboard, than to not have that. But you have to constrain that. Take a step back. Read the classics if you have to. In heated moments like this, after Charlie Kirk died, I was advising people to go and read Plato's Gorgias, because it was an invitation to the thought that maybe evil can't kill the good, and that's helpful to some people, but it's also that breath before you overreact. I don't know if you've ever heard of the old story of Genghis Khan and the hawk. It's worth a read if you haven't. And these old classics have relevant wisdom because these troubles that we're facing in Minnesota, as historic as they are not so different from the troubles that we faced, 100 years ago, or 2,300 years ago. So I'll conclude there. Thanks so much for listening, guys.